Greetings, beloved ones, and welcome to Satsang. On Friday, much of the world noted the burial of Alexei Navalny in Russia. And we took note of this because of what he stood for and because of the hope that was engendered in the hearts of thousands of people. When we think about what he stood for, and when we allow this event of standing for something so strongly that one is prepared to die for it, we have to look into our own hearts and see what we stand for and what we hope for, because he embodied not just standing for something, but hoping for something. And so we have to look into our own hearts to see what it is that that kind of gesture of magnificent overcoming of fear, of despair, of indifference, what that means to us individually. When I reflect on this, and I do this with you now, beloveds, I want you to think about what freedom means. Because freedom is not a simple thing. It's a beautiful thing, but it's not a simple thing. And it is what all of humanity is striving towards. All of humanity. When we think about freedom on the level of the Russian people and the thousands that gathered in response to his burial, we think about freedom from oppression. We think about freedom, political freedom, social freedom, the freedom to vote, the freedom to have a say about who governs you. We think about those things. And in that moment of standing for freedom, thousands of people took the risk of being vulnerable to arrest in the process of standing for something, because it was that important to them. And also as an expression of hope. Because the expression of hope has to go along with the expression of freedom, and the expression of freedom at the same time has to honor the freedom of others. So this is why freedom is complex, beloved ones, because we get mixed up sometimes about what it means to be free individually and don't know two different things. Sometimes we don't know the consequences of our own saying, I am free, to somebody else, whose freedom we may be diminishing, sometimes very simply just by the way we talk to them. We may be wanting to be free to be ourselves, but narrowing or diminishing the right of somebody else to be free to be themselves. So that's one aspect of the complexity of freedom. And the other, or another, is we are not free if we are operating under illusion. We are not free if we are dominated by either irrationality or impulsiveness or something that resembles freedom but is not that, is a false sense of freedom. So, you see, it's complex. It's easier to talk about freedom when we look at it as external, with an obstacle, an oppressive force that we're trying to overcome. And it's more difficult to talk about it when we think about what it means in our individual lives, because then it requires some careful thought about how is it that we express ourselves in the world, and how is it that we encourage others to express themselves. Our freedom, the freedom of the individual, is meant to operate in harmony with the freedom of others, not to desecrate or limit or undermine or sabotage, or whatever, the freedom of others. And there is a way in the divine matrix that we all belong to that's possible. But that divine matrix is not what many of us can hold in a solid way. And so we can get caught up in a kind of entitlement to be free. You know, like to be free, I'm going to speak my truth and I'm going to be free to speak my truth. Well, yes and no, because sometimes that's not freedom. Sometimes that's something else. Sometimes it's of the ego and not of the truth, but of the need to overpower someone or defend something, or many other motives play a part. But in the case of Alexei Navalny, and in the case of the Russian people, what was so meaningful about this moment in time was the knowledge that in the presence of oppression, one could have hope to be free of that oppression. And that the world, and that each individual in the world needs to believe in that, needs to believe in the possibility of freedom of the individual, of the society, of each one. The world needs to believe in that. So, if you find yourself vulnerable to despair, or cynicism, or disillusionment, or a sense of giving up, this is what this being, the one who came to help the Russian people, was giving to them. The sense that anything is possible. Anything is possible. And among the various things that he stood for was that understanding. And his burial there were two pieces of music that were played. And the poignancy of that is very great. One was Frank Sinatra's song, I Did It My Way. And the other was, The future is not written. The future is not written. He was saying that to the Russian people. The future is not written, which is the music from, as I understood it, Terminator 2, the movie. The future is not written. We, beloveds, need to be inspired by this sense that anything is possible, and that what looks like it is an impasse, or what looks like overwhelming odds, what looks like nothing can ever change, what looks like we can never change, we need to look at that with different eyes, to think that the future is not written inside ourselves, because there are many reasons. When we look at the world, sometimes we feel that there are situations that are intractable, that can't be changed. Or when we look inside ourselves and say, I've been in this pattern, and I've been doing this for such a long time, and this has been with me as a limitation for such a long time, I don't see how I'm ever going to do anything different. That too. Freedom is a gift of the divine spirit within us, but it's also complex. Complex because we have to find our way to what it really is. And we have to find our way in the presence of hope, because without hope, we can't find our way. We have to be able to explore possibilities. How can I be more of myself? How can I be free of limiting concerns? How can I be free of illusion? How can I be free of limitation without doing something to someone else or expecting something of someone else? Because your freedom Your freedom is inside yourself. The freedom that comes from standing in the face of oppression, when we're talking about an external force, that involves each individual standing for something inside themselves, and then all those inside themselves getting together to stand for something together. But in our everyday life, your freedom involves standing for something and having the courage and the hope that you can do that. That you can do that. And so in the face of all that we know about the repression and oppression of the Russian government, and in the face of all that we know historically of how that has worked, this person, Alexei Navalny, in his willingness to give all to what he believed in, said, "Russia shall be free. The future is not written." And that's a magnificent testimony to our capacity to stand for light in the presence of darkness. And we are each being called to that. We are being called to stand for light in the presence of darkness as a path to freedom. Sometimes the darkness represents itself as the path to freedom, but it's a false path. That's the illusion. The darkness can represent itself through words primarily, saying, "I am the way to your freedom, I am the way to a better life," and it can mean something completely different. So it's not that everything that uses these words is true. Freedom has to do with the light being able to stand in the presence of darkness and to declare itself as present. But in order to do that, it has to know what illusion is and what darkness is, so that it doesn't mistake itself and doesn't go in a different direction. This is a time, beloved ones, when we are each being called to stand for something that we believe in, and not just outwardly, inwardly too. I mean, it doesn't have to be a political stance. It can be that you stand for the integrity of your own being. That is of great importance. The integrity of your own being. You stand for the willingness to be true to yourself. And to the degree that it's possible, the capacity to express being true to yourself. And we are being called by the divine and by the human landscape that we live in to do that. Because the forces that would restrict freedom are very strong. The forces that would create illusion and substitute for freedom is very strong. So we need to learn more. We need to be humble in our needing to learn more. And we need to feel the courage of the spirit that Alexei Navalny represented and that others in history have also represented. The courage to stand for the freedom to be in integrity in one's own self. The courage to do that. In the presence of that which may deny it. In the presence of that. In our present era, in our present day that we're living in, freedom and courage have a lot to do with each other. We can conceive of a time when the right of each individual to be free to be themselves and to define their own lives and to live in the integrity of their own being will not be challenged in the way that it is today. We can conceive of a world where that might be possible. But it hasn't arrived yet because we're still in the old pattern of dominance where we being certain nations or certain groups of people, feel that we have a self-interest and we can grasp our own freedom, even if it makes somebody else unfree. We're still in that pattern of either of the other versus the self, and the idea of dominance being a primary motive. But we can imagine a world where that's not the case. And in preparation for that world, this is how we bring it about. By valuing these things that have to do with our own spirit. Valuing that we came here as a divine human creation to freely express the truth of who we are, and not to take it away from somebody else, but to be respectful of the freedom of each created being to be itself. That's it. The freedom of each created being to be itself. And so, respect for that, and the gift of that, and the willingness to live in that constant attitude of respect. That's how we create a new world. That's how. And we do it through the willingness to be in truth with ourselves, which is also the willingness to be in truth with the love that we carry that allows us to want the same gift to be for each other, not just for the self. We do it, we claim our own freedom in the same breath as we give it to others. And that giving it to others is the blessing of love. That we don't take it away from others, we give it to them. By respecting them, by honoring them. We can see in this shining example of one single individual who came here to help freedom become real for many people. We can see something of ourselves in it because we have come here to help the world in a similar way, perhaps not on such a large stage, but in a similar way, because what we do to stand for moral integrity and hope and courage, what we do is our gift to the world. It may be that we're operating within a smaller context or a smaller number of individuals, but that doesn't matter, because the vibration of that, of what we bring to give to others, from the integrity of our own being and from the wish that they be free to be themselves, that's what establishes the possibility of a new world coming into being. You are being called to this, beloved ones. We are all being called in this time to recognize the path to true freedom and to steer away from those deceptive paths that claim to be that and are not that. We are being called to have hope in the presence of darkness, and we are called to the light, to stand for the light in the presence of darkness. And we have each come here at this time because in our soul we know that we have the capacity to do this. We know that. Your emotional self may not feel that way sometimes, but your deeper self came here to do this, to be a testimony to the possibility for living in freedom, in hope, in courage, and of bringing it as a gift to all other beings. You came here to do this, and this is what needs to awaken in human consciousness. We bless the spirit of the one who came to serve the purposes of freedom and love, both. And we bless the divine, which has given to us this same capacity to stand for freedom, hope, and love. Om Namo Bhagavate, Om Namo Namaha. I bow to the Supreme Being that lives within all. Namaskar.